The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Officer Blake adjusted his red uniform jacket for what felt like the 100th time that week. 3 years of standing guard at the palace gates had taught him that Tuesday mornings were usually quiet, predictable even. The tourists hadn't quite reached their peak numbers yet, and the local workers were already settled into their daily routines. Blake had always taken pride in his position. Being chosen as a royal guard wasn't just a job, it was an honor that came with serious responsibility. Every morning when he put on that iconic red coat and tall black hat, he carried the weight of centuries of tradition on his shoulders. His grandfather had served in the same regiment 40 years earlier, and his father often reminded him that protecting the crown meant protecting the people. The crisp autumn air made his breath visible as he scanned the street in front of him. Years of training had sharpened his senses to notice the smallest details. The way someone walked, how long they lingered in one spot, whether their eyes darted around nervously. These were all pieces of a puzzle that could mean the difference between a normal day and something much more serious. At exactly 11:30, the first wave of morning visitors began to arrive. A group of elderly tourists shuffled past, cameras clicking away as they marveled at the palace architecture. Blake remained perfectly still, his expression neutral, but his eyes were constantly moving. This was the part of the job that most people didn't understand. Looking like a statue was just for show underneath that stoic exterior. He was always alert, always watching. A jogger ran past, earbuds in, completely focused on her morning exercise routine. Two businessmen walked by discussing their lunch plans. A mother pushed her baby stroller while talking on her phone. Everything seemed normal, just another ordinary Tuesday morning in the heart of the city, but then something caught his attention. A small white van had pulled up across the street, parking in a spot that gave a clear view of the palace entrance. Blake's training kicked in immediately. Delivery vehicles were common in the area, but this one felt different. The driver didn't get out to make a delivery. Instead, he just sat there, engine running, occasionally glancing toward the palace gates. Blake had learned early in his career that gut feelings were never something to ignore. His instructor at the academy used to say that instinct was just your brain processing information faster than you could consciously understand it. Right now, every fiber of his being was telling him that something wasn't right about this van. The vehicle itself looked ordinary enough. White paint, slightly dirty from city driving, no unusual markings or decorations. But it was the behavior of the driver that set off alarm bells in Blake's mind. Normal delivery drivers moved with purpose. They parked, grabbed their packages, and went about their business. This man was just sitting there, watching. Blake shifted his weight slightly, a movement so small that casual observers wouldn't notice, but it gave him a better angle to keep the van in his peripheral vision. His years of experience had taught him how to observe without appearing to stare. The last thing he wanted was to alarm innocent people or tip off someone who might actually be up to no good. The driver appeared to be in his 30s, wearing a dark baseball cap pulled low over his face. Blake couldn't make out many details from this distance, but the man's body language spoke volumes. He kept checking his watch, glancing at the palace entrance, and then looking back down the street as if he was waiting for something specific to happen. Minutes ticked by, and the van remained in place. Blake began mentally cataloging everything he could observe. The license plate was partially obscured by dirt, which could be coincidental but felt suspicious. The van had tinted windows on the sides, making it impossible to see into the back. Most legitimate delivery vehicles had clear windows or company logos, but this one was completely anonymous. A group of schoolchildren began gathering near the palace gates, their bright yellow safety vests making them easy to spot. Blake's attention was momentarily divided between watching the excited kids and keeping an eye on the mysterious van. The children were clearly on a field trip, their teacher trying to organize them into neat lines while explaining the history of the building behind the imposing iron gates. It was then that Blake noticed the van driver's behavior change. The man sat up straighter, his attention now fully focused on the group of children. He reached for something on the passenger seat. Blake couldn't see what it was, and then stepped out of the vehicle. Every muscle in Blake's body tensed. his hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to his rifle, though he kept his expression neutral. Years of training had prepared him for moments like this, when split-second decisions could mean the difference between preventing a tragedy and living with regret forever. The man from the van began walking slowly toward the school group, but something about his approach felt calculated, predatory even. He wasn't moving like someone who had legitimate business in the area. Instead, he seemed to be studying the children, looking for something or someone specific. Blake's radio crackled softly with routine communications from other guards, but he barely heard it. His entire focus was now on this unfolding situation. The teacher was busy managing the larger group, and Blake could see that one small child had wandered slightly away from the others, apparently fascinated by the ornate details on the palace gates. The stranger's pace quickened slightly as he noticed the separated child. Blake's training told him that predators often looked for exactly this type of opportunity, a moment when a child was isolated, confused, or distracted. The man's body language had shifted from casual observation to focused intent, and that change sent every alarm bell in Blake's head ringing at full volume. Blake knew he had to make a choice. He could continue observing, hoping his suspicions were wrong, or he could act on his instincts and potentially prevent something terrible from happening. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. A guard's duty isn't just to stand and look impressive. It's to protect people, especially those who can't protect themselves. The stranger was now close enough to the child that Blake could see him preparing to speak. The man had put on what appeared to be a friendly expression, the kind of fake smile that Blake had been trained to recognize. Everything about this situation screamed danger, and Blake knew that his next few seconds of action could change everything. The autumn breeze picked up, rustling the leaves on the nearby trees and carrying with it the sounds of the city, traffic, distant conversations, the laughter of children. But Blake heard none of it. His world had narrowed down to this one critical moment, this one decision that would define not just his day, but potentially the life of an innocent child. His training had prepared him for many situations, but nothing quite compared to the real thing. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he realized that whatever happened next would be because of the choice he was about to make. In the distance, he could hear the teacher calling for the children to stay together, but her voice seemed far away, almost dreamlike. Blake took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and prepared to act. 7-year-old Lily had always been curious about everything around her. While her classmates listened to Mrs. Johnson explain the history of the palace, Lily found herself drawn to the intricate patterns carved into the iron gates. The swirling designs seemed to tell stories of their own, and she couldn't help but step closer to get a better look. The field trip had started perfectly. Lily's class had been excited for weeks about visiting the palace, and she had spent the previous evening asking her mom countless questions about kings and queens and royal guards. Her mother had smiled and promised that she would see real guards in their famous red uniforms, just like in the picture books they read together at bedtime. But now, standing just a few feet away from the actual palace gates, Lily felt overwhelmed by how big and impressive everything looked. The iron bars stretched high above her head, and beyond them, she could see the grand building that she had only seen in photographs. It was like stepping into one of her fairy tale books, except everything was real and much larger than she had. Imagine. Mrs. Johnson's voice seemed to fade into the background as Lily traced the metal patterns with her finger, being careful not to actually touch the gates. She had been taught to look but not touch during museum visits, and she figured the same rules probably applied here. The designs were so detailed, with flowers and leaves and what looked like tiny crowns worked into the metalwork. When she finally looked back toward her class, Lily felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The group of yellow safety vests that had been right behind her was now much further away. Mrs. Johnson was pointing toward a different part of the palace, and all of her classmates had moved to get a better view. Somehow, while she had been admiring the gates, everyone had walked away without her noticing. Lily's heart began to beat faster. She had been told countless times never to wander away from the group during field trips. Her teacher had made all the students promise to stay together, and now she had broken that promise without even meaning to. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she realized how much trouble she might be in. She tried calling out to Mrs. Johnson, but her voice came out smaller than she expected, and the sounds of the city seemed to swallow her words. There were so many other people around, tourists with cameras, business people walking quickly past, and the steady hum of traffic from the nearby street. Her small voice couldn't compete with all of that noise. The palace area suddenly felt enormous and intimidating. Buildings stretched up on all sides, making Lily feel tiny and lost. She had never been in this part of the city before, and nothing looked familiar. Even if she wanted to find her way back to school, she wouldn't know which direction to go. The thought of being lost in such a big place made her tears flow even faster. As Lily stood there, uncertain and frightened, she noticed the tall figure in the red uniform standing perfectly still near the palace entrance. The royal guard looked exactly like the pictures in her books, with his impressive black hat and serious expression. For a moment, she felt a tiny bit of comfort. If there were guards here, maybe this wasn't such a scary place after all. But before Lily could decide whether to approach the guard for help, she heard a friendly voice behind her. "Hey there, little one." Lily turned around to see a man walking toward her with a warm smile on his face. He looked like he could be somebody's dad, wearing casual clothes and speaking in the kind of gentle voice that adults used when they wanted to be helpful. After feeling lost and scared, hearing someone offer help felt like a relief. "You look like you might be lost," the man continued, crouching down slightly so he was closer to Lily's height. "Are you here with your family?" Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded toward where she thought her class might be. "I'm with my school," she said in a shaky voice, "but I can't find them anymore. I was looking at the pretty gates, and when I turned around, everyone was gone." The man's expression became even more sympathetic. "Oh no, that must be really scary. But don't worry, these things happen all the time. I bet your teacher is looking for you right now." He glanced around as if searching for the missing class. "What's your teacher's name?" "Mrs. Johnson," Lily replied, feeling a little better now that a grown-up was helping her. "She's wearing a blue coat, and all my friends have yellow vests like mine." "Yellow vest? That's smart," the man said, nodding approvingly. "That makes it easy to spot your group. Tell you what, I have a van right over there." He pointed toward the white vehicle parked across the street. "We can drive around the area and look for your class. I bet we'll find them in no time." The offer sounded reasonable to Lily. Adults were always helping children find their parents in stores and parks, so this didn't seem any different. The man seemed nice enough, and she was getting more worried about how much trouble she would be, and if Mrs. Johnson couldn't find her. "My van is very comfortable," the man continued, his smile growing wider. "I even have some snacks and juice boxes in there in case you're getting hungry. Field trips can be tiring, can't they?" Lily nodded, suddenly realizing that she was actually a bit thirsty. The morning had been full of excitement and walking, and she had forgotten to drink much water. The idea of sitting in a comfortable van while searching for her class sounded much better than standing here crying and feeling lost. The man extended his hand toward her. "Come on then, let's get you reunited with your friends. I'm sure they're worried about you too." As Lily began to step toward the stranger, she felt that same flutter of nervousness she sometimes got when something didn't feel quite right. Her mother had taught her about stranger danger, but this man seemed genuinely concerned about helping her. He wasn't trying to rush her or grab her, and he had explained exactly what he planned to do to help. Still, a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her of all the conversations she'd had with her parents about being careful around people she didn't know. But those conversations always seemed to involve scary strangers in dark alleys, not nice men offering to help lost children find their school groups. The internal conflict made Lily hesitate for just a moment. She looked back toward the royal guard, who seemed to be standing at attention and looking in her direction. Then she looked at the helpful stranger, who was waiting patiently for her decision with that reassuring smile. "It'll just take a few minutes," the man said gently. and then you'll be back with your friends before you know it. Your teacher will be so relieved to see that you're safe." The promise of being reunited with her class quickly and easily was exactly what Lily wanted to hear. The alternative was standing here alone and scared, hoping that somehow Mrs. Johnson would notice she was missing and come back to find her. That could take much longer, and Lily was already imagining how upset her teacher would be. Taking a deep breath, Lily made her decision and began walking toward the white van, trusting that this kind stranger would help her solve her problem just like he had promised. Blake's instinct screamed at him as he watched the scene unfold. Every fiber of his training told him that what he was witnessing wasn't a random act of kindness. The man's approach, his body language, the way he had positioned himself between the child and her school group, it all added up to something that made Blake's blood run cold. Without hesitation, Blake stepped forward from his post. His movement was deliberate and commanding, the kind that immediately drew attention from everyone in the immediate area. Years of training had taught him how to project authority with just his presence, and right now, he needed every ounce of that power. "Stop right there." His voice cut through the morning air like a blade, clear and unmistakable. The command echoed off the palace walls and caused several tourists to turn and stare. Blake's tone left no room for discussion or debate. It was the voice of someone who expected immediate compliance. The little girl froze instantly, her small hand that had been reaching toward the stranger's outstretched palm stopping mid-air. Her eyes went wide with surprise and confusion. One moment she had been about to accept help from a kind stranger, and the next a royal guard was shouting commands at her. The sudden change left her feeling scared and uncertain about what she had done wrong. The man from the van also stopped, but Blake noticed how his reaction was different from the child's. Where Lily showed genuine surprise and confusion, the stranger's response seemed calculated. His friendly smile faltered for just a split second, so briefly that most people wouldn't have caught it, before snapping back into place like a mask being adjusted. Blake positioned himself directly between Lily and the stranger, his imposing figure creating a physical barrier. At 6 feet tall and wearing the full Royal Guard uniform, he cut an intimidating figure that commanded respect. His years of service had taught him that sometimes presence alone could defuse a dangerous situation. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding," the man said, his voice still carrying that same gentle tone he had used with Lily. "I'm just trying to help this lost child find her way back to her school group. She seemed frightened and alone." The words sounded reasonable enough, but Blake had been trained to look beyond surface appearances. The man's body language told a different story. His feet were positioned in a way that would allow him to quickly retreat to his van if necessary. His hands, which had been extended toward Lily moments before, now hung at his sides with fingers slightly curled, a defensive posture that suggested he was preparing for potential confrontation. "Miss, what's your name?" Blake asked Lily, his voice much gentler now but still maintaining its authority. He never took his eyes off the stranger, using his peripheral vision to keep track of the man's every movement. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The poor child was clearly overwhelmed by the sudden attention and the tension she could feel in the air, even if she didn't fully understand what was happening. "And where is your school group, Lily?" Blake continued, crouching down slightly so he could better hear her response while still maintaining visual contact with the potential threat. "Over there." Lily pointed toward where she could see the yellow safety vests of her classmates clustered around Mrs. Johnson near the far side of the palace gates. "I was looking at the pretty gates and got lost." Blake nodded, filing away this information while his mind raced through possible scenarios. The child's story was simple and believable, exactly the kind of innocent mistake that predators looked for and exploited. A momentarily separated child, confused and frightened, would be vulnerable to someone offering help and promising to reunite them with their group. "Sir, I appreciate your concern for the child," Blake said to the stranger, his tone professional, but firm. "However, I'll be handling this situation from here. Palace security protocol requires that all lost children be assisted by official personnel." The man's smile became slightly strained. "Of course, officer. I just wanted to help." You can't blame someone for being a good citizen, right? He took a small step backward, but Blake noticed that his eyes kept glancing toward his van. I was going to drive her around to look for her class. Sometimes it's faster than walking, especially when a child is upset. Red flags went up in Blake's mind. Legitimate Good Samaritans didn't typically offer to take unknown children into their vehicles, especially when official help was readily available. The suggestion of removing the child from the immediate area, away from witnesses and security cameras, fit the pattern of predatory behavior that Blake had studied during his training. That won't be necessary, Blake replied firmly. We have established procedures for reuniting lost children with their groups. He reached for his radio with one hand while keeping his other hand free and ready. Control, this is Palace Gate 1. I need assistance with a lost child and a civilian situation. The radio crackled to life immediately. Copy, Gate 1. What's your status? 7-year-old female, separated from school group. Group is visible approximately 50 meters east of my position. I also have a male civilian here who approached the child. Blake spoke clearly into his radio, making sure both Lily and the stranger could hear every word. He wanted the man to understand that this situation was now being officially documented and monitored. Roger that. Backup is en route. Do you need immediate assistance? Blake studied the stranger's face carefully. The man's expression had shifted slightly, the friendly mask slipping just enough to reveal something darker underneath. His eyes had hardened, and Blake could see him calculating his options. Negative on immediate assistance, but maintain readiness, Blake responded into his radio. The message was as much for the stranger's benefit as it was for his colleagues. He wanted the man to know that help was coming and that any attempt to escalate the situation would be met with swift response. Look, officer, I can see you're just doing your job, the stranger said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I was only trying to help, but I can see that you have everything under control now. He began backing away more obviously now, his movements suggesting he was preparing to leave, but Blake wasn't ready to let him go so easily. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct he had was telling him that this man represented a real threat. The way he had approached Lily, the offer to take her in his van, the nervous energy that seemed to radiate from him, it all painted a picture that Blake didn't like. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay put for just a few more minutes, Blake said, his voice leaving no room for argument. My colleagues will be here shortly, and we'll need to document this incident properly. The man's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, annoyance, and then something that looked almost like panic. Document what incident? I haven't done anything wrong. Helping a lost child isn't a crime. No, sir, it's not, Blake agreed. But approaching children and offering to transport them in your vehicle does require some follow-up questions. I'm sure you understand our need to be thorough when it comes to child safety. Blake could hear footsteps approaching. His backup was arriving right on schedule. The stranger's eyes darted toward the sound, then back to Blake, then toward his van. The man was clearly weighing his options, and Blake prepared himself for whatever decision the stranger might make next. Within 2 minutes, Blake could hear the distinctive sound of boots on pavement as 3 additional security officers approached from different directions. Their timing was perfect, coordinated, and professional, just as they had trained countless times before. Officer Martinez came from the left, Officer Thompson from the right, and Sergeant Williams approached directly from behind Blake's position. The stranger's demeanor changed immediately when he saw the backup arriving. The friendly mask he had been wearing began to crack under the pressure. His eyes darted between the approaching officers and his white van parked across the street. Blake could practically see the man's mind racing, calculating whether he could make it to his vehicle before the officers could stop him. "Good morning, sir," Sergeant Williams said in a calm but authoritative voice as he approached the stranger. "I understand there's been a situation here involving this young lady." "No situation at all," the man replied quickly, his voice slightly higher than it had been before. "Just a misunderstanding. I was trying to help a lost child, and this officer seems to think I have bad intentions." Blake noticed how the man's hands were trembling slightly now. Sweat had begun to form on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. These were classic signs of someone under extreme stress, and Blake's training told him that innocent people rarely showed such obvious signs of nervousness when simply questioned by police. I see, Williams nodded thoughtfully. Well, we appreciate citizens who want to help, but we do need to follow proper procedures when children are involved. Would you mind if we took a look at your vehicle? Just standard protocol. The color drained from the stranger's face. My van? Why would you need to look at my van? I haven't done anything wrong. It's purely routine, sir, Officer Martinez explained, stepping closer. When someone approaches a child and offers transportation, we have to verify that the vehicle is safe and legal. I'm sure you understand our concern for child safety. Blake watched the interaction carefully while keeping one eye on little Lily, who was standing quietly beside him. The poor child looked confused and frightened by all the adult conversation happening around her. She didn't understand why so. Many police officers had suddenly appeared, or why the nice man who had offered to help her seemed so upset. Actually, I really need to get going, the stranger said, taking a step toward his van. I have appointments to keep. This has all been a big misunderstanding. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stay put for just a few more minutes, Williams said firmly. We won't keep you long, but we do need to complete our investigation. Blake could see panic beginning to set in on the man's face. His breathing had become more rapid, and he kept glancing toward the van as if it represented his only escape route. Everything about his behavior confirmed Blake's initial suspicions that this was not an innocent Good Samaritan. Officer Thompson, would you mind escorting our young friend here back to her school group? Williams asked, gesturing toward Lily. I think she's had enough excitement for one day. Thompson smiled warmly at Lily. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you back to your teacher. I bet she's worried about you. As Thompson gently led Lily away, Blake felt a sense of relief. Getting the child to safety was the most important priority, and now they could focus on dealing with the suspicious man without worrying about her well-being. The stranger watched Lily being led away, and Blake noticed something disturbing in the man's expression. There was disappointment there, maybe even anger. It was the look of someone whose plans had been disrupted, not the relief that an innocent person would feel when a child was being helped. Now then, Williams continued, let's take a look at that vehicle of yours. You can't search my van without a warrant, the man protested, but his voice lacked conviction. He was clearly grasping for any legal protection he could think of. Actually, sir, when there's reasonable suspicion involving child safety, we have certain authorities, Martinez explained, but we'd prefer your cooperation. It makes things much easier for everyone involved. Blake and his colleagues had been trained to handle exactly this type of situation. They knew how to apply pressure without overstepping legal boundaries, and they understood the psychology of dealing with potential predators. The key was to remain professional while making it clear that resistance would only make things worse. The group began walking toward the white van, with the stranger reluctantly leading the way. Blake noticed that the man's gait had become unsteady, as if his legs weren't quite supporting him properly. Fear and adrenaline were clearly taking their toll when they reached the vehicle. Williams performed a visual inspection of the exterior while Martinez positioned himself to prevent any sudden escape attempts. Blake stood ready to assist if needed, his hand remaining close to his radio in case additional backup was required. The license plate is partially obscured, Williams observed, pointing to the rear of the van. That's a traffic violation right there. That's just mud from driving, the stranger said weakly. It's not intentional. I'm sure it's not, Williams replied diplomatically. Now, would you mind opening the back doors for us? The man's face went completely white. His hands were shaking so badly now that he had trouble getting his keys out of his pocket. Look, officers, maybe we can work something out here. I really haven't done anything wrong. Blake felt his stomach tighten. Innocent people didn't try to negotiate their way out of simple vehicle inspections. The man's behavior was confirming every suspicion that Blake had developed over the past few minutes. Sir, all we're asking for is a quick look inside, Martinez said patiently. If everything's legitimate, you'll be on your way in no time." With trembling hands, the stranger finally managed to unlock the rear doors of the van. As the doors swung open, Blake felt his blood run cold. What he saw inside made him instinctively reach for his weapon. Though he didn't draw it, the back of the van had been completely modified. Instead of the empty cargo space you'd expect to see, there were thick blankets hanging from hooks on the walls. A small mattress was bolted to the floor, surrounded by children's toys and snacks. Most disturbing of all were the restraints, zip ties, and rope that had clearly been placed there for a specific purpose. Williams immediately called for additional backup while Martinez moved to secure the suspect. Blake stepped back to get a better view of the entire scene, his mind reeling from the implications of what they had discovered. "This isn't what it looks like," the man said desperately, but his protest sounded hollow even to himself, Blake thought. About little Lily, who was now safely back with her school group. He thought about how close she had come to getting into this van, and what might have happened if his instincts hadn't kicked in when they did. The modified interior told a story that made him feel sick to his stomach. A laptop computer was mounted on a bracket near the front of the cargo area, and Blake could see that it was still powered on. Whatever was on that computer would likely provide even more evidence about the man's true intentions. As Martinez read the suspect his rights, Blake realized that what had started as a routine morning of guard duty had turned into something much more significant. His quick thinking and willingness to trust his instincts had potentially prevented a tragedy that could have destroyed multiple lives. The suspect was immediately placed under arrest and taken away in handcuffs, but Blake's work wasn't finished yet. The discovery of the modified van had triggered a much larger investigation that would involve multiple law enforcement agencies. Blake remained at the scene to provide his statement and assist with the evidence collection process. Detective Rodriguez arrived within an hour to take charge of the investigation. She was a seasoned professional who specialized in cases involving crimes against children, and Blake could see the grim determination in her eyes as she surveyed the contents of the van. "Officer Blake, I understand you were the first to spot suspicious behavior?" she asked, pulling out her notepad. "Yes, ma'am," Blake replied. The man had been sitting in that van for at least 15 minutes, just watching the palace entrance. When the school group arrived, his attention focused specifically on the children. "That's when I knew something wasn't right." Detective Rodriguez nodded as she wrote down his statement. "Your instincts may have saved that little girl's life. We've seen setups like this before, and they rarely end well when there's no intervention." As the morning progressed, more details about the investigation began to emerge. The laptop found in the van contained disturbing evidence that confirmed Blake's worst fears about the man's intentions. The suspect had been monitoring this area for weeks, studying the patterns of school visits and family outings to identify potential opportunities. Blake learned that this wasn't an isolated incident. The investigation revealed that the man had been operating across multiple locations throughout the city, always targeting areas where children might become separated from their guardians. Parks, museums, shopping centers, and tourist attractions like the palace had all been part of his hunting ground. The modified van told an even more chilling story. Forensic specialists found evidence suggesting that this vehicle had been used before, though they couldn't yet say how many times or with how many victims. The restraints, the soundproofing materials hidden behind those blankets, and the supply of children's snacks all painted a picture of someone who had put considerable planning into his criminal activities. While the investigation continued around him, Blake couldn't stop thinking about little Lily. She had been returned to her school group completely unaware of how much danger she had been in. To her, the morning's events were probably just a confusing interruption to her field trip. She would go home that evening and tell her parents about seeing the Royal Guards, never knowing that one of those guards had quite literally saved her life. Mrs. Johnson, Lily's teacher, approached Blake later that afternoon with tears in her eyes. She had been briefed on what had happened and wanted to thank him personally. "I can't believe how close we came to losing her," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice shaking with emotion. "One minute she was right behind me, and the next minute she was gone. I was about to start searching when I saw all the police activity. Blake tried to reassure her that field trips were challenging and that children wandering off was more common than people realized. The important thing is that she's safe, he told her. Your students are lucky to have a teacher who cares so much about their well-being. The story quickly made its way through the ranks of the palace security force. Blake's colleagues praised his quick thinking and professional response, but he found it difficult to accept the compliments. In his mind, he had simply done what anyone in his position should have done. The thought of what might have happened if he had ignored his instincts was too disturbing to dwell on. Captain Harrison, Blake's commanding officer, called him into the office that evening for a debriefing. You showed exceptional judgment today, Blake. Your actions reflect the highest standards of our service. Thank you, sir, Blake replied. I just hope other officers would have done the same thing in my position. That's exactly the kind of attitude that makes you a good guard, Harrison said with a smile. But don't underestimate what you accomplished. Today, this case is going to have ripple effects throughout the city's law enforcement community. Indeed, the arrest had already triggered a broader investigation into child trafficking networks operating in the area. The suspect's computer contained contacts and communications that suggested he was part of a larger organization. Detective Rodriguez had assured Blake that his actions had not only saved one child but had potentially disrupted an entire criminal operation over the next few days. Blake found it difficult to concentrate on his regular duties. Every time he saw children visiting the palace, he found himself scanning the area more carefully, looking for anyone who might be watching them with inappropriate interest. His colleagues noticed his increased vigilance and understood that the incident had affected him deeply. The local news media picked up the story, though they kept Lily's identity confidential to protect her privacy. Blake was offered several opportunities to give interviews, but he declined them all. He felt that drawing attention to himself wasn't appropriate, and he preferred to let the investigation proceed without media interference. Lily's parents requested a meeting with Blake a week after the incident. They brought their daughter with them, wanting her to properly thank the guard who had protected her. Lily had made a drawing of Blake in his red uniform, complete with his tall black hat and serious expression. Thank you for keeping me safe, Lily said as she handed him the drawing. Mommy and Daddy told me you're a real hero. Blake knelt down to Lily's level and accepted the drawing gratefully. You're very welcome, Lily, but remember, the real heroes are people like your teacher and your parents who take care of you every day. The meeting with Lily's family was both rewarding and emotional for Blake. Seeing her happy and safe, surrounded by people who loved her, reinforced why he had chosen a career in protective services. These were the moments that made all the training and vigilance worthwhile. The suspect eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges related to attempted kidnapping and child trafficking. The evidence found in his van, combined with the digital evidence from his computer, made his conviction virtually certain. Detective Rodriguez informed Blake that the man would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Blake returned to his regular duties at the palace gates, but the experience had changed him. He approached his job with an even greater sense of purpose, knowing that his vigilance could make the difference between safety and tragedy for innocent people. His fellow guards noticed that he had become something of a mentor, sharing his experience and encouraging them to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. Months later, Blake still kept Lily's drawing in his locker. It served as a daily reminder of why his job mattered and why staying alert was so important. The drawing showed him standing tall and proud in his uniform, but what it really represented was the commitment that every guardian makes to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The incident became part of the training curriculum for new palace guards. Blake's actions were studied as an example of how proper observation, quick thinking, and decisive action could prevent crimes before they happened. His story inspired a new generation of guards to understand that their role extended far beyond ceremonial duties. For Blake, the greatest reward wasn't the commendations or the recognition from his superiors. It was the simple knowledge that somewhere in the city, a 7-year-old girl was growing up safe and happy, completely unaware of the danger she had escaped but surrounded by people who loved her. That knowledge made every day of standing guard at the palace gates feel like the most important job in the world.